Thank you. Well, it's a real pleasure and honour, a privilege to be back with you again today. And I'm going to take delight in introducing every member of the panel. They'll come up. We'll start actually with Shane. So Dr. Shane Clifton joining us again. And Shane, welcome Shane.
Thank you.
A Professor of Theology and Ethics, Honorary Associate at the University of Sydney, and working at the Disability Royal Commission. Shane is doing a presentation at 4:30 this afternoon. Be here for it. It's going to be great. And I'm riveted in reading the books that you've written, that I'm reading them both at the same time. So thanks, Shane. We'll have Petrea coming up next. And I know, please welcome Petrea to the stage. I know you've had a chance to meet Petrea already. Hi, Petrea. Feel free to have a seat. A leading wellness educator and a cancer survivor, the CEO and the founder of the Quest for Life Foundation, which is an amazing place down at Bundanoon. I've had the privilege to be able to go visit you down there, Petrea. I've walked her beautiful labyrinth that she's got there, and it's really a great place that provides support when you need it most. So welcome, Petrea. Janine, we've just heard from you, Janine. Thank you. Now, Janine, I read your book, your first book, when it first came out, and that was what, 1994, I think, in the mid-90s? Or
any seat?
Any seat you like, wherever you like. I think that was somewhere in the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think. Read her book, and then I read it again, and then I read it again, and then I read your next one, and I watched the movie. Like, just amazing things that you're doing, and absolutely loved hearing your presentation then. Thanks, Janine. We've got Jioji next, otherwise Georgie. So really great to have you here as well, Chair of Social Work and Policy Studies at the University of Sydney. And I don't know, I just get so bubbly and energetic when I'm anywhere near you, even if that's hearing you on a podcast. It's just absolutely great. And your voice, your singing, incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Dalia Feldheim, please join us back on the stage again. And you had a great introduction of Dalia before. The leader of the Dare to Lead, the creator of the Dare to Lead Like a Girl campaign. And really lovely to have you here. So thank you, everyone. You're talking about diversity and inclusion, very much a necessary topic. And so I think I might just launch straight into it. I'm looking at Jioji, if it's okay, to ask you the first question, which is, what do we lose if we don't include diverse perspectives in our society, and how does that impact our individual and our collective well-being?
Yeah, thank you. I think that when we don't meaningfully include diversity, we create an us and them. We create silos, we create divisions, and we create a society that is not truly inclusive. And I feel like really fanboying about all these panel members. So I'm like, oh my gosh. But by virtue of us being able to have that shared space and that shared conversation, we get shared outcomes. And that's really what we're wanting to achieve. It's about being able to ensure that people are seen, they're heard, they feel that they are visible and that they're valued. So important. And when we do that, especially again with so many multiple areas of diversity, again, age, gender, class, religion, sexuality, ability, then we create just and inclusive societies.
And how do you think that has a benefit for, well, I know you've got the just and the societies individually as well. What about from your perspective as an individual? How would an individual benefit if we have that more within the society as well?
There's that notion of reciprocal living. We've got a concept in Pacific indigenous languages, including Fijian, this notion of Solosolovaki. And it's this idea that we all are part of this bigger community, that we all belong, similar to what I was saying earlier today, but it's this notion of reciprocal living, that my well-being is your well-being. So by virtue of us being positioned in that context, we're all part of that collective conversation.
Yeah, I love that. My well-being is your well-being, and vice versa. Yeah, that's great. Janine, you've talked about how you've tried to spend your adult life fitting in, but that robs us of our uniqueness. And so with that change of perspective and the courage that it takes, how has that impacted your well-being?
Well, it's been such an incredible journey. I mean, doing my PhD now and really doing a deep dive into disability theory, it's been interesting because I can actually track, the experiences that I've had that caused me to sort of suppress that part of myself, because the message I got was, look, society judges disability harshly, so don't be disabled. And so I was in this in-between world of spinal cord injury where it was very easy for me to pass. And, quoting Brené Brown again, she talks about, the difference between fitting in and belonging. And we need to be our authentic selves. It's not about changing who we are, it's being who we are. And, funnily enough, my eldest recently changed their pronouns. I'm getting better at not misgendering here, to they, them. And we sat down and I said, look, explain to me, I want to understand more about this. And Annabelle sat down and explained how, the spectrum and where they fit in. And it was Annabelle that really made me think about my own journey and disability and thinking, well, if they're brave enough to do that and that's how they're authentic, I can be brave enough to say, you know what, I have a disability and I'm going to lead like a disabled person. And that it is a wonderful community. And of course, having Shane as my Shane teaches me so much about what it means to be proud of disability. It makes the journey so rich. You don't have to hide who you are anymore. And I think that we can tell in the world we're all dying for that. We want to be authentic. We want to say, this is who I am. And it's not just disability, but gender and culture and race and whatever it is. This is who I am. And that's part of the magnificent human journey.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for saying that. And like you were saying, so the words, did I hear it right? Fitting in is different to belonging?
Yes. Fitting in is trying to be like everyone else. And belonging is, this is who I am.
That's the ownership.
I'm authentic and I'm bringing myself. And I think we realise that we're more alike than we think.
We are.
And don't be afraid of, I'm sure there's people in the audience here today who think, ooh, this has been my story, but I'm ready to tell another story. There's another layer and it's okay. And just tell those stories. Yeah. Share them.
Yeah. I feel that bubbling of hearing you speak and hearing the other speakers and the ones we had yesterday as well. Just that real ownership of who we are. And that we don't need to change ourselves just to fit some mould or some box that society perhaps expects us to. So thank you for everything that you've been doing. I like the link that you made back to Dalia's, and I think that's great.
That ad makes me cry.
No, you make me cry. Crying is good.
Yeah, it makes me cry too. It always has. I was sitting down there again, and I've seen it for over so many years now. So from your perspective then, Dalia, and it was great hearing what you were saying, what does a safe environment look like then? And I know you've given some fabulous tips there, and each of those could be, like you said, that half day or full day thing, but what does a safe environment look like so that people can feel confident and able to contribute without fear of ridicule or judgment? So from your lived experience, what does that look like?
Thank you. And I'm sitting here with these giants. I think, I did my thesis on psychological unsafety, right? But I'm a positive psychologist, so, focusing on the positive of what psychological safety actually means. The term was coined in the 60s by Amy Edmondson, most famously, if you know the book, Courageous Companies. She talks about, it's a collective feeling that we can bring our full selves to the workplace without fear, right? And there's a whole kind of theory that she gives on the importance. First of all, psychological safety has proven to be the #1 driver of high-performing organizations. Okay, so Google did that research. So it's really important enabling people to be more creative, more productive, you know, creating a learning environment. So number one, it's really important. Now, how do you get psychological safety? The role of the leader is really paramount here. Okay, you can work for an amazing company. One leader, you know, you mirror the bad behavior, but the good news is that you also mirror good behavior. So, you know, when we talk about psychological safety, the first thing is really, you know, recognizing the importance. You know, setting the scene in terms of expectations of a psychological safe environment, inviting participations. I think we talk so much about diversity, and I heard, oh yes, we plunked 2 ladies on the board, we have diversity. And I keep on saying, yeah, diversity maybe is the numbers, but the more important element is inclusion. Inclusion looks like turning to those more quiet, more different, okay, points of view, inviting participations, you know, encouraging voice, encouraging failure. So I talked about psychological safety being the #1 driver of high-performing organization. #1 driver of psychological safety is leaders admitting mistakes. Okay, we learn to fail or we fail to learn. So inviting, you know, encouraging fail-forward behavior. And I recently kind of, you know, with the great breakup, which is the new term for women living in buckets, right? And the notion, there's a lot of research coming up, women are cut off significantly more often than men. And I recently was in a meeting where the leader, you know, turned back to that woman, he didn't cut her off, one of her colleagues did, and he said, Andy, you got cut off before, what did you want to say? And that was just, you know, this is the behavior we want to see, right? So inviting voice, you know, recognizing, appreciating all points of view. Thank you for sharing that. Inviting, you know, I want to hear the devil's advocate point of view. Does anyone have a different point of view? Have we evaluated it from all perspectives? And then finally, you know, punishing misalignment. And I can tell you in my environment, that was very unsafe, as I mentioned, right? I heard later on that, you know, there was a lot, it's very contagious, right? Mirroring a leader. So it became like, you know, a language that people, even after that leader left, and I heard in one conversation, you know, these kind of language kept coming up, and the leader said, well, we don't speak like that, you know, in our company. We don't recognize, we don't appreciate such behavior. So being very quick on saying, you know, this is the behavior we don't appreciate. Let's hear from everyone. That's how we create psychological safety. And I was just looking at this circle, and a quote came out. I heard it very early in my career. You know, they drew a circle and left me out. So I drew a bigger circle and left me in. So.
Wow. I'm really hearing a sense of selflessness in that as a leader, that there's like taking the ego out of it a bit and asking people, all people, what do you think? Gathering the opinions from everyone.
Being vulnerable.
Yeah, being vulnerable, being authentic. Yeah. And so the thing about inclusion, Shane, I'd like to ask you this question, perhaps from your own personal experience or maybe from the work that you do with the Disability Royal Commission. But has there been a time when you have felt excluded or discriminated against, and how did that affect your personal well-being? Or if you wish to talk from the work that you do with the Disability Royal Commission.
Yeah, look, I actually have to start answering that question by recognising that I am a well-educated, white, middle-class man who lives in Australia. So I'm privileged. I'm here on a stage, for example. So it's interesting, the circles, there's actually multi-circles, and sometimes we're in some of them and out some of them. But of course, disability at its essence is about exclusion. So we tend to think of disability as being about the physical body, but actually disability is about the way in which our physical differences and psychological differences cause us to be excluded from society. And of course, personally, and all my colleagues with disability experience, exclusion in all sorts of ways, whether that's physical. I can remember the very early days of being in a wheelchair, and when you're first in this wheelchair, you feel like everyone is looking at you. You're extremely self-conscious. I don't notice it now, but I remember being invited to a wedding, and it was at the Rocks at Darling Harbour, and I said, "Is it accessible?" "Sure." We get there, and of course, the wedding's up a flight of stairs, and they say, "Oh, don't worry about it, we'll carry you up." And hey, this wheelchair is 180 kilos, and I am 100 kilos, slightly less now. You just can't pick this up. So they picked me up out of my wheelchair and carried me separately. They put me to the top of the stairs, flopped me onto a couch, and I'm sort of surrounded here, so I'm stable. But and just to join the ladies here, I burst into tears because I felt so vulnerable at that point in time. You could do that to me now, by the way, I wouldn't care. So the world is an inaccessible world. Even yesterday, we only just managed to get me on the stage because the stupid lift was not working, literally. I was on the way out, I was stuck in that lift for about 20 minutes while we tried to work out how to get us out. They solved it, so this is not our conference's fault, not to blame. I cannot get into most of your houses. So in my street, I can't visit a single neighbour. For example. And so, look, that's the physical space. Probably, I think, the more challenging forms of exclusion are the attitudinal, the psychological exclusion that I think people with visible disability sometimes face less than those with intellectual or mental illness or communicative disabilities. We judge really harshly people who struggle to communicate. And then I could expand that. My daughter is transitioning, so we've been podcasting her transition journey over the last year, and trans women, for example, face, in this political age where transgender is so well publicised, forms of exclusion that I don't deal with in everyday life. So there are all of these concentric circles of exclusion. But having said that, I think also the world is changing in remarkable and positive ways, and people with disability are able to be proud of that now, and trans women can walk the street proudly now. So I'm optimistic, despite the fact that the world is often an exclusionary space.
Good to hear that you're optimistic. I was going to ask you that. So, yeah, good to hear that that's how you're feeling about things. I can't remember if I mentioned that when I was in conversation with Bastian yesterday, but like my 13-year-old daughter, for example, she is so into and across everything that you've just been talking about, and that gives me hope. That gives me such great hope. Petrea, I'd really love to ask you, we've had a conversation about this before, but it feels like we kind of need to let go of that binary view of we're this or we're that. And we can more embrace like a both and perspective. So how does that sit with you? You would say this so much better than the way I'm trying to ask it in this question.
Not at all. But I was reflecting on the people who attend our programs at Quest, because they're all dealing with trauma. So whether it's the trauma of treatment, the trauma of a disability, the trauma of grief, loss, murder, mayhem, whatever it is. And it often amazes me that people travel so far to find a safe place in which they can utter the unutterable and have it witnessed and affirmed by people without judgment. And when I reflect on how does that even happen, because people are really deeply traumatised. We get a lot of police and veterans and paramedics and so on. They're not on a spiritual journey. They don't think they're on a spiritual journey. But of course, we have these 4 guidelines: confidentiality, that your name, your story stays here. So I think these are good guidelines for life. When people share their story, let it find its rest in you rather than be a source of gossip or passing it on to somebody else. We listen 100%, which means one person talking at a time. It also means really hearing the other person's perspective and not my reaction to their perspective. Because if I'm thinking, your story's a breeze, you should hear mine, that's me listening to myself, not hearing the other person. And it's very powerful to have people deeply listen to you without judgment. Third one is we don't judge or criticise. However you feel, that's how you feel. And it's fine to feel anything. It's what you do with the feeling that matters. And so it's okay to feel murderous rage. It's okay to feel almighty lust, but you might not want to act on it. And having that capacity to witness yourself having the feeling rather than someone saying, oh no, you shouldn't feel like that. No one ever finds that helpful. And even with feelings, rage, lust, envy, jealousy, whatever it is, if that's how you feel, that's how you feel. So having that in place. And the fourth one is we stay with how we feel rather than our theories about how things could be, should be, ought to be, how our family, doctor, society, anyone else thinks things ought to be. And that way we just get to be ourselves and share our reality, knowing that we're not going to be judged, knowing that our story is safe and is going to come to rest in people and not be a source of conversation outside of that very sacred space that is, that you spoke beautifully of, that holding space in which people can utter the unutterable. It's such a rare experience to have 20 people listen deeply to your reality, especially when it's full of trauma.
And so freeing, I would imagine, as well.
And for me, you know, it extends to every corner of the property. It's how the gardens are cared for, it's how the food is presented, it's the quality of the food, it's the fact that the place is spotlessly clean, because if you come into an area that's already chaotic, there's no rest in that for people. So given that so many people who come to us are deeply agitated and distressed, they need to come into a calm environment that's ready to receive them.
To receive them as they are.
As they are.
And knowing, like you said, that we all have thoughts that could be of any kind of flavour or theme or anything like that. Us as humans, we seem to be the only species that has opinions about our thoughts. Like, I mean, I don't know that much about other species, so who am I to say? But like, we feel sad and we're angry about it. But what I heard in what you were saying was this great acceptance, basically, of who we are.
Yeah, because, you know, otherwise there's a part of us that's unacceptable.
Yeah.
And then we have to fit in or hide it or pretend, and I spent too long in my life doing that.
Yeah, yeah.
And we all do, you know, we keep that facade highly polished for everybody. But yeah, I heard myself say one day, I'd rather be dead than live like this. An inauthentic life. And I was dying. So it was, I think we need to create emotional safety for people in which they can have the experience that they're having. Not because I know what it's like for them. It's never helpful to say, I know exactly how you feel. You have no idea how the other person feels. But if you're familiar with your own anguish, your own despair, your own abandonment, rejection, whatever it might be, it makes you a better companion to be with other people who may be stumbling around in the dark of their own inner territory.
There's a real call there to, like, you know, I've heard it say that our second life begins the moment we realise we in fact only have one. And that's similar to what you were saying, that I don't want to live like this if this is not true to who I am.
Yeah. I suspect we have one life, but many bodies.
So I want to just bring in a bit of a different aspect, and I'm going to go back to you, Jioji, if this is okay, because we've seen examples where trying to, and I'll put it in air quotes, impose inclusion on organisations has not been handled particularly skillfully. And I'm thinking about how there were 7 Manly players who didn't want to wear the Gay Pride jersey back in July. And so how can we bring in the more conservative voices on this diversity and inclusion journey without othering them in the process? Like, how can we manage our resistance so that we're not othering them and everyone feels heard and respected? Yeah. And I guess I'm also thinking, because you grew up in quite a conservative family and yet identified as queer from a young age. So from your experience and perhaps from your Pacifica culture, what can you teach us?
One of the key things, again, going back to that notion that we all belong and that we're all part of something bigger, for me, the diversity conversation is one where we do respect everyone to have a differing opinion. That's fine. But people from diverse backgrounds, whether it be religious or sexual or age, also need to understand that it's a shared space. And that creates a shared conversation, which then requires us to also know that people need to be willing to learn. Learn, as you heard me said previously. Education is key. So if we expect to have religious freedoms in the context of our faith and spirituality, then we also need to know that there's also room and space for sexual diversity and freedoms to occur. So it's part of a shared conversation that everyone needs to be empowered to have, whilst also creating a safe space where people can actually voice their opinions without fear of judgment, whilst also understanding, again, that it's a shared space, it's a shared space, it's a shared space. And that's really, really important. And so I think that's key when it comes to areas of diversity. And if we are going to operationalise that in an organisational context, it's really, really important that we create those conversations that are inclusive, that does provide people to have a consultation period, but also a collaborative one that actually means that the change process is done together.
Done together and listened without the judgment, like Petrea was saying. We are at the end of our time. We could be here for another hour and a half, I reckon, having this conversation, if not a day and a half. But please join me in thanking our panellists for their time today. Thank you.